Eleanor Hartwell had been swallowing her anger for 25 years. She had learned to hold it behind her teeth, to press it down beneath her ribs, to let it burn quiet. But tonight, watching a stranger dismantle her father's dignity in front of every neighbor they had ever known, she felt every last one of those years crack open at once. She pushed her chair back. She stood up. And the room went so silent she could hear her own heartbeat counting down to something she could not yet name. If this story already has your heart pounding, stay with us. Subscribe to this channel. Follow Eleanor's story all the way to the end, and drop a comment telling us what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. The summer of 1817 had been unforgiving. The tobacco fields at Hartwell Plantation stretched wide and brown under a Virginia sky that hadn't offered rain in 6 weeks. The creek at the eastern boundary had dropped so low that Eleanor could see the gray clay bottom of it when she walked the fence line in the mornings before anyone else was awake. She walked that fence line every morning. She had been doing it since she was 16 years old when her mother died, and her father stopped looking at the land with anything resembling intention. Tonight, though, she wasn't walking fields. Tonight her father had called a dinner. Samuel Hartwell was the man who believed firmly that a well-set table could fix almost anything. A roasted chicken, a decent candle arrangement. 6 neighbors seated with their best manners out, he had convinced himself these things still meant something. That they still meant he meant something. Eleanor had helped Martha polish the good silver that afternoon. She had ironed the tablecloth herself. She had pinned her dark hair back and put on the pale blue dress she wore to church, the one with the mended seam at the left cuff, that she hoped no one would notice. She had done all of it because she loved her father despite everything. She had not expected a stranger to arrive. He came in a black coat on a black horse. Eleanor was standing near the parlor window when she heard the hooves on the long drive. She saw him dismount without ceremony, hand the reins to their farmhand Joseph without a word of greeting, and walk toward the front door like a man who had already decided what he thought of the place. He was tall. He was younger than she expected, though not young, perhaps early 30s. His jaw was set hard, and his eyes, when he stepped into the lamplight of the entry hall, were a pale flat gray that reminded Eleanor of the sky right before a hailstorm. Her father came rushing into the hall like a man who had been waiting and dreading in equal measure. "Mr. Blackwood," Samuel said, and Eleanor heard the particular thinness in his voice that she had learned to fear. "Welcome. Welcome to Hartwell." The man Blackwood looked around the entry hall with a slow, deliberate gaze. He looked at the faded wallpaper. He looked at the water stain above the doorframe that Eleanor had been meaning to have painted over for 2 years. He looked at the hall table, which was slightly uneven because one leg had been repaired poorly. He said nothing for a long moment. Then he said, "Is supper ready?" That was all. No thank you for the invitation. No remark about the long ride from wherever he had come from. No acknowledgement of Eleanor standing 6 feet away in her church dress. "Of course," Samuel said, moving quickly toward the dining room. "Of course, come in, come in. Eleanor, come along." "She can find her own way," Blackwood said, already walking past her. Eleanor stood very still. Then she followed.
But why?
The dinner table seated 8. Her father had invited the Calloway family from the next farm, and the Reverend Marsh and his wife, and old Thomas Deary, who had known Samuel Hartwell since they were boys. These were the people Eleanor had grown up eating Sunday meals with. These were the people who brought casseroles when her mother died. They were seated and smiling, and already a little uncomfortable in the way that people become when they can sense that something is wrong but cannot name it. Blackwood sat at the far end from her father. He ate sparingly. He drank nothing but water. He spoke when spoken to, and not a syllable more, and the quality of his silence was not the comfortable silence of a man at ease. It was the silence of a man who was observing, calculating, filing things away behind those gray eyes. Eleanor sat across from Mrs. Calloway and tried to make conversation. She asked after the Calloway children. She complimented Mrs. Marsh on the jam she had brought as a gift. She did what she always did at these dinners, which was to hold the social fabric together stitch by stitch while her father sat at the head of the table and performed the role of a prosperous man. It was Reverend Marsh who made the mistake of drawing Blackwood into conversation. "And what business brings you to our corner of Virginia, Mr. Blackwood?" the Reverend asked pleasantly. Blackwood looked at him. "Finance," he said. "Ah." The Reverend nodded. "Banking, is it? We have need of good banking men in this region. The years since the war have been difficult, many families struggling." "Yes," Blackwood said. "I'm aware." His eyes moved briefly to Samuel Hartwell. Eleanor felt the first cold thread of something move through her chest. Her father reached for his wine glass. "Mr. Blackwood comes from the Meridian Bank of Philadelphia." Samuel set his voice light, his fingers tight on the glass. "We've had some correspondence about investments, opportunities in the region." "Is that so?" said Thomas Deary in his warm, uncomplicated way. "Well, there's plenty of good land here. A man with capital could do well." "He could," Blackwood said, "if the land is what it's represented to be." Something in the way he said it landed on the table like a stone dropped into still water. Mrs. Calloway looked at her plate. Reverend Marsh touched his collar. Eleanor looked directly at Blackwood. He was already looking at her. "You've toured the property?" she asked. Her voice was steady. She was proud of that. "Not yet," he said. "Then perhaps," she said, "you ought to hold your assessments until you have." The table went very quiet. Blackwood tilted his head slightly. It was not agreement, and it was not apology. It was the look of a man recalibrating. "Eleanor," her father said softly, warningly. "No," she said, not looking away from Blackwood. "If Mr. Blackwood has traveled from Philadelphia to assess this property, he should do so with his own eyes, not with whatever he has read in a ledger." "I always use my own eyes, Miss Hartwell," Blackwood said. "Eventually. Then I suggest you use them sooner rather than later," she said, "and perhaps direct them at the faces of the people at this table rather than at their furnishings." Thomas Deary made a sound that might have been a suppressed laugh. Mrs. Calloway took a very deliberate sip of water. Samuel Hartwell looked like a man watching a barn fire he had accidentally started and could not now put out. Blackwood said nothing. He picked up his fork. He continued eating. And Eleanor understood with a cold and perfect clarity that she had not won anything at all. After dinner, the guests gathered in the parlor. Samuel poured brandy for the men. Martha brought out a plate of biscuits. The Reverend Marsh played a few hymns on the old piano, slightly out of tune, and for a short time the evening became what it was always meant to be, gentle and warm and dishonest. Eleanor stood near the window. She was watching her father. She had become expert at watching him over the years. She knew the signs, the way he stood too straight when he was nervous, the way he laughed a beat too late at jokes, the way his left hand moved toward his breast pocket when he was carrying something he was ashamed of. His hand had been moving toward that pocket all evening. Blackwood had not joined the social gathering. He had taken himself to stand near the bookshelves at the far wall. He was reading the spines of the books there, not touching them, just reading them with the same measuring quality he gave to everything. Eleanor crossed the room. She stood beside him. Not close. The right distance for a conversation that was not quite private. "My father's library," she said. "I see that. Most of those books belonged to my grandfather. He built this house in 1791. And managed it well, I imagine," Blackwood said. "He did." "The second generation rarely matches the first," he said. "The third generation almost never does." Eleanor felt heat move up the back of her neck. "You don't know my family," she said. "I know their debts," he said simply. "That tells me more than I need." She turned to look at him directly. "You're a rude man, Mr. Blackwood." "I'm an honest one." "They're not the same thing." "No," he agreed. "But the first one tends to carry the second." "Not in my experience," she said. "In my experience, rude men use honesty as a cover for cruelty. They say hard things not because truth matters to them, but because they enjoy the effect." He was quiet for a moment. "That's a careful observation," he said. "I've had years of practice," she said, "around men who thought plain speech made them righteous. And do you think plain speech makes me righteous, Miss Hartwell? I think, she said, that you came to this dinner with a purpose, and that it has nothing to do with investment opportunities. And I think that whatever it is, you have not yet decided to say it plainly, which suggests your honesty has limits. He looked at her for a long moment. Something shifted behind those gray eyes. Not warmth, but something other than the flat assessment she had been reading there all evening. You are more perceptive than your father, he said. That is a low bar, she said. A silence. Then quietly he said, yes, it is. It happened at 9:30. Samuel Hartwell, 3 brandies into the evening, with his left hand in his breast pocket and his courage in the wrong place, made his announcement. He did it the way he did everything, with a flourish that was meant to look like confidence and landed as desperation. Friends, he said, raising his glass, I want to formally introduce our guest this evening. Mr. Gideon Blackwood, whom I have known through correspondence these past months, is a man of considerable standing. He is... And here, her father's voice caught just slightly, just enough for Eleanor to hear it. He has agreed to take on a partnership role here at Hartwell, to help us through certain difficulties of a financial nature, to become in a real sense a part of this family's future. The room received this with the particular stillness of people who had already suspected it. Eleanor did not move. Furthermore, her father continued, and his voice had taken on the reedy, too bright quality of a man reading from a script he had memorized badly. Mr. Blackwood is a man of title, of standing. In his home country, Samuel's throat worked once. He holds the title of Duke. The silence that followed was absolute. Eleanor's hands had gone cold. She had been arguing with a duke. She had told him he was rude and cruel and dishonest all the way through dinner and across the bookshelf and straight to his face, and he had not told her. He had let her say every word of it. She turned to look at him. He was watching her. Those gray eyes held something she did not have a name for yet. Not triumph, not amusement exactly. Something more careful than either. You didn't tell me, she said. Her voice came out quieter than she intended. The room heard it anyway. No, he said. You let me... She stopped, swallowed. You allowed me to speak to you as though I was a man, he said. Yes, I did. She stared at him. Why? He looked at her for 3 full seconds before answering. And in those 3 seconds, Eleanor felt something tighten in her chest that she would not examine, would not name, would file away into the box where she kept all the things she could not afford. Because no one else in this room has said an honest word to me all evening, he said. I was curious what it felt like. Thomas Deary cleared his throat. Reverend Marsh reached for his wife's hand. Samuel Hartwell was staring at his daughter with the expression of a man watching a house fire and realizing he was standing inside it. Eleanor turned back to face the room. She straightened her spine. She pressed her hands flat against her skirt so no one would see them shake. Then I hope it was worth the trip, Your Grace, she said. She did not wait for his answer. She walked out of the parlor and through the front door and onto the porch into the heavy summer night, where the air smelled of dry tobacco and distant rain and everything she was afraid of losing. She stood there in the dark for a long time. Behind her, through the walls of the house her grandfather had built, she could hear the murmur of voices. Her father making apologies, Mrs. Calloway saying something soothing, the clank of a glass being set down, and then boots on the wooden floor, a step at the threshold, a voice quiet and direct behind her right shoulder. Miss Hartwell. She didn't turn. The grounds, Gideon Blackwood said. Tomorrow morning, before breakfast. I want to walk every acre of this property, and I want you with me. She said nothing. Not your father, he said. You. She turned then. He was standing in the doorframe, the lamplight behind him, his face in shadow. And if I refuse, she said, then I will reach my conclusions, without the benefit of what you know about this land, he said. And my conclusions will determine what happens to your family, to these fields, to every person employed on this property. She felt the words land exactly where they were intended to land. That is a threat, she said. It is a fact, he said. I am told there is a difference." She stared at him for a long moment. The night air moved. The tobacco leaves rustled in the fields below the porch. Somewhere far off, a whippoorwill called once and was silent. "Dawn," she said. "I walk at dawn. If you can keep pace, you're welcome to come." She went inside. She did not look back. She lay awake until 3 in the morning. She lay and stared at the ceiling and ran the numbers in her head the way she always did when she couldn't sleep. The yield estimates, the labor costs, the quarterly interest on the note her father had signed 18 months ago with a bank in Philadelphia. A bank called Meridian. She had known about the note. She had found the paperwork herself folded into her father's desk drawer underneath a copy of a hunting almanac 8 months after he signed it. She had confronted him. He had told her it was temporary, a bridge nothing to worry about. He had told her this with the full conviction of a man who had been telling himself the same thing. She had gone over the numbers every month since. She knew what they said. She had simply not wanted to know what they meant until now. Now she lay in the dark and let herself know it. Gideon Blackwood had not come to Virginia for a partnership. He had come because the note was due. And they could not pay it. She pressed her hands flat against the mattress. She breathed. She thought about her mother's grave in the small cemetery at the east end of the property, under the 2 oak trees that went golden in October. She thought about the 14 families who worked these fields and lived in the tenant houses along the southern fence. She thought about Joseph, who had been her father's farmhand since before she was born, and Mary, who ran the kitchen, and the Tuttle children, who came to the farm school she had started 3 winters ago. She thought about all of it. And then she thought about a man with gray eyes who had let her insult him all evening because he wanted to know what honesty felt like. She got up before dawn. She dressed in her working clothes. She put her hair in a plain braid. She laced her boots. When she stepped out onto the porch, the sun was still below the tree line and the air was cool enough to see her breath for just a moment. Gideon Blackwood was already standing in the yard. He had traded his fine black coat for a plain one. His boots were worn, Eleanor noticed. Not the boots of a man who was only ever indoors. He was looking out at the fields with his arms at his sides and his face tilted up slightly, and for just a moment before he heard her step, she saw something in his expression that she had not seen at dinner, not calculation, something older and quieter, something that looked almost like grief. Then he turned, and the gray came back into his eyes. "Miss Hartwell," he said. "Mr. Blackwood," she said. "Your Grace." She said it flat, not with mockery, just with accuracy. He made a short movement with his hand. Not a dismissal. Something more like discomfort. "Blackwood is fine," he said. She looked at him. "Out here," she said, "you can be whoever you came to be. You came to see the land. I'll show you the land." She stepped off the porch. "Try to keep up." She walked. He kept up. They walked for 3 hours. Eleanor set the pace and did not slow it. She took him east first along the fence line she walked every morning where the creek had dropped to its lowest point in memory. She did not explain it. She simply walked to the edge of the bank and stood there and let him see the gray clay bottom and the thin thread of water moving through it. Blackwood stood beside her and looked at it for a long moment. 6 weeks without rain, Eleanor said. "I know. The eastern tobacco block will be a partial loss this harvest, maybe 40% of yield. And the rest of the fields? The northern block is better. We have a well that runs deep. I've been rotating the labor there." She turned and walked. "Come." He followed. She showed him everything. She showed him the northern fields where the tobacco was green and standing. She showed him the repaired irrigation channel that she had paid for out of the household account 8 months ago, the one her father didn't know about because he hadn't asked. She showed him the equipment shed where she had organized and cataloged every tool on the property, the inventory list tacked to the inside of the door in her own handwriting. She watched him read it. His finger moved down the list slowly. "This is current?" he asked. "As of last Tuesday," she said. "Your father provided this." She looked at him steadily. "No." He turned to look at her. "I did," she said. "I have kept the operational records for this property for 6 years. Not the financial records, the operational ones. Yield estimates, labor schedules, equipment, maintenance, soil rotation. Those are mine." He turned back to the list. He was quiet for a moment. "And the financial records," he said. The question landed soft, but it landed heavy. "Those," she said, "belong to my father." It was the most honest answer she could give. It was also, she knew, the most damning. He didn't push it. He folded the inventory list carefully, exactly as it had been, and tacked it back to the door himself. That small thing, the care of it, caught her off guard. She walked him south after that, through the open pasture ground where the tenant families kept kitchen gardens past the row of houses along the southern fence. 3 of the houses needed roof work. She knew it. She had been trying to get her father to authorize the repair costs for 7 months. Outside the second house, a woman named Clara was hanging washing. She had 3 children, the youngest, maybe 2 years old, sitting in the dirt at her feet. Clara saw Eleanor and straightened up. "Morning, Miss Hartwell." "Morning, Clara. How's the baby?" "Better. Fever broke day before yesterday." Clara's eyes moved to Blackwood with the careful, measuring look of a woman who had learned to read strangers quickly. "Sir." Blackwood nodded to her. "The roof," Eleanor said quietly to Clara. "I haven't forgotten." "I know you haven't, miss." Clara's voice was steady, but her eyes said everything else. Eleanor moved on. She did not look at Blackwood. She did not need to. He had seen it. They were coming back along the western fence when he spoke. "How many families on this property?" he asked. 14. 61 people total, including children. "And the wages?" She recited them from memory. Rate by roll frequency of payment, the arrears that had accumulated over the past 2 quarters, when her father had pulled from the labor account to cover other debts. She kept her voice flat. She watched him absorb it. His jaw tightened once. Just once. "Miss Hartwell," he said. "Yes." "The note your father signed with Meridian Bank 18 months ago. You know the terms." She was quiet for 3 full steps. "I found the paperwork," she said. 8 months in. "And you know what the quarterly figures mean." "I can read a balance sheet," she said. "Yes." He stopped walking. She stopped too. They were standing in the middle of the western pasture, the sun fully up now, the air already carrying the weight of another hot summer day. "Tell me what they mean," he said. Not a challenge. Something closer to a test. She turned to face him. "They mean," she said, "that we are 4 months from default, that the property at current debt level cannot service the note on existing yield projections, that my father has been drawing down the principal in ways the bank did not authorize." She paused. "And that you did not come here to negotiate. You came because the note has been called." Silence. A long one. "Yes," Blackwood said. One word. Eleanor had known it was coming. She had known it since she saw him in the entry hall. She had known it on some level for months, running the numbers in the dark, knowing it didn't make the word easier to hear. She breathed. "How long do we have?" she asked. 60 days from the formal notice," he said, "which I have not yet delivered." She looked at him sharply. "Why not?" He looked back at her. "Because I wanted to see the land first." "You've seen it. I've seen what you've built on it," he said, "which is not the same thing as what the ledger reflects." She stared at him. "What does that mean?" she said. "It means," he said carefully, "that I have questions about the financial records that I cannot answer by looking at the land, and that some of those questions are not about the land at all." She felt the first real cold move through her, different from the cold of the creek or the cold of last night's parlor. This was the cold of understanding something you have been circling for a long time. "You need to see the books," she said. "Yes." "My father's books." "Yes." She held his gaze. "Then we need to go back to the house," she said. She turned and walked, faster than before. Behind her, Blackwood kept pace. He always kept pace. Samuel Hartwell was at the breakfast table when they came in. He had the look of a man who had slept badly and was hoping good manners could paper over it. He stood when they entered. He looked between Eleanor and Blackwood with the particular anxiety of a man waiting to find out how badly a thing had gone. "Well," Samuel said, forcing brightness into his voice, "how do the fields look?" "We need the ledgers," Eleanor said. The brightness dropped off her father's face like something falling. "The Eleanor, our guest, hasn't even had breakfast." "The ledgers, father." Samuel looked at Blackwood. Something passed between the two men. Eleanor watched it happen and felt the cold deepen. "Samuel," Blackwood said quietly, "I think we both know we're past the point of delay." Her father's shoulders dropped. Something that had been held rigid in him for God only knew how long seemed to go slack all at once. He looked older in that moment. He looked like what he was, a man who had been pretending for so long that the pretending had worn him down to the bone. "The study," Samuel said. His voice was flat. "The books are in the study." He led them there himself. He unlocked the desk drawer. He set 3 leather-bound ledgers on the surface and stepped back from them like a man stepping back from a fire. Eleanor sat down and opened the first one. She had not been allowed in these books. She had asked twice and been refused both times. She had built her operational records around the gaps, working from what she could observe, from what the laborers told her, from the bills that came through the household account. Now she looked at the numbers directly. The first thing she saw was a figure she recognized. The second thing she saw was a figure she did not recognize. The third thing she saw made her hands stop moving on the page. "Father," she said. Her voice came out very quiet. "Eleanor, this withdrawal." She put her finger on the line. "March of last year, $400 drawn against the tobacco account." She looked up. "We had no capital expenditures in March. I know because I managed the equipment schedule. There was nothing purchased in March." Samuel said nothing. "And this one?" She turned the page. "July, 320, marked as labor costs." She looked at him. "I pay the labor. I keep those records. This amount does not match anything in my books." Silence. Blackwood was standing against the wall. He had not sat. He was watching Samuel Hartwell with the flat gray patience of a man who had done this before. "Samuel," he said. Her father's hands moved. He put them in his pockets. Then he took them out again. "There were debts," Samuel said. "Private debts. They weren't in the formal accounts." "Gambling debts," Eleanor said. It wasn't a question. Her father flinched. "How much?" she said. "Eleanor, how much?" Samuel pressed his lips together. "Over the past 3 years, approximately..." He stopped. "Approximately $2,000. The number sat in the room. Eleanor looked at her father. She looked at him the way you look at something you have been afraid to look at clearly for a very long time. She looked at the man who had held her on his knee and read to her from those books in the library. She looked at the man who had stood at her mother's grave and wept without any dignity at all, the grief too real to manage. She looked at the man who had over and over for years and years taken the thing she was building and quietly dismantled it to serve his own weakness. She looked at all of it. She said nothing. Blackwood stepped forward from the wall. "Samuel," he said, "I need you to step out." Her father looked up. "I need to speak with your daughter alone," Blackwood said. "She's my daughter, and this is my..." "It is no longer simply your house," Blackwood said. The words were quiet. They were also absolute. "The note has been called. That is a fact that exists regardless of this conversation. Now please step out. What I have to say to Miss Hartwell concerns the future of this property, and that is something she appears to understand considerably better than you." The silence was a long one. Then Samuel Hartwell turned and walked out of the study and closed the door behind him. Eleanor did not move from her chair. She looked at the ledger page. She looked at the numbers her father had written in his careful, slanted hand. She thought about how much of her life was layered underneath those numbers. How many mornings, How many fence line walks? How many nights lying awake running figures? Say it, she said. Blackwood came and sat in the chair across the desk. The bank will foreclose, he said. At current debt levels on current yield projections, there is no path to solvency. That is the reality. I know that. But, he said. She looked up. The operational condition of this property is not reflected in those ledgers, he said. What you have built here, the irrigation system, the labor structure, the soil rotation, the inventory management, that represents genuine value. Capital investment essentially that has not been formally accounted for. She stared at him. You're saying the property is worth more than the books show. I'm saying the property under the right management could service a restructured note, he said, over 5 to 7 years. Under the right management, she said carefully. Your father cannot be part of that arrangement, he said. That is not a cruel statement. It is a necessary one. He will need to be removed from any financial control of the property. Eleanor was quiet. And you would restructure the note, she said. Meridian Bank would consider it. With conditions. What conditions? He looked at her steadily. That someone with actual understanding of this property be placed in authority over it, he said. Someone who can be held accountable to the bank for quarterly progress. Someone whose operational record demonstrates competence. The air in the room was very still. She understood what he was saying. She also understood that he was not going to say it plainly. Not yet. He was going to make her say it. She breathed. You're talking about me, she said. I'm asking whether you're willing, he said. You're asking whether I'll take responsibility for a property that is drowning in my father's debts on terms set by the bank that holds the note with my father removed from any authority he has left. She looked at him. You're asking me to save something that was never supposed to be mine to save. Yes, he said. I am. She looked at the ledger. She looked at the numbers. She looked at the 3 years of withdrawals. She thought about Clara outside the tenant house with the baby who had just gotten over a fever. She thought about the 14 families along the southern fence. She thought about the northern tobacco block that was green and standing because she had managed the water carefully through 6 weeks of drought. She thought about her mother's grave under the oak trees. She looked up. I need to know something first, she said. Ask. You've done this before, she said. Come to properties like this, done this assessment, made these arrangements. She held his gaze. How does it usually end? He was quiet for a moment. Badly, he said. Usually. Why? Because the person placed in authority usually doesn't have the backbone for it, he said. The work is hard. The resentment from the displaced party, in this case your father, is considerable. The bank's conditions are strict. People agree to the arrangement and then find reasons not to hold to it. And you think I would hold to it, she said. I think, he said slowly, that you have been holding to it for 6 years without anyone's authorization or acknowledgement, which suggests you don't need either to do what is necessary. Eleanor looked at him for a long time. She thought about what it would mean, what it would cost, the conversations with her father, the looks from neighbors, the weight of it. She thought about the alternative. She thought about 60 days. She thought about all of it. I have conditions of my own, she said. Something shifted in his expression. Small, precise, not quite a smile. Something that looked like respect maybe. Cautious and contained, but real. Tell me, he said. The roof repairs on 3 of the tenant houses, she said. Authorized and funded before any formal restructuring agreement is signed. Those families have been waiting 7 months. Noted. The labor arrears, full payment within 30 days, before any bank conditions are discussed. That will require Meridian's approval. Then get it, she said. Those are people who have been shortchanged. They work this land. They don't carry my father's debts. He looked at her. Third, she said, my father does not leave this property destitute. I won't have him put out with nothing. He may not manage the finances, but he lives here. That is non-negotiable. Blackwood was quiet for a long moment. "Those are serious conditions," he said. "Yes," she said. "The first two are likely achievable," he said. "The third is complicated. An authorization structure that allows your father to remain on the property while removing his financial control is complicated," she said. "I know. Do it anyway." He looked at her across the desk. "You are," he said very quietly, "not at all what I expected to find here." She did not let herself react to that. She filed it away. "Do we have an agreement in principle?" she said. He stood. He extended his hand across the desk. "In principle," he said. She stood and took it. His grip was firm and brief. She expected him to release her hand immediately. He held it 1 second longer than necessary. Then he let go. "I'll need 2 days to send correspondence to Philadelphia," he said. "And I'll need to review the remainder of those ledgers today." "I'll stay," she said. "You'll have questions." "I will," he said. He pulled the ledger toward him. She sat back down. And for the next 4 hours they worked side by side at her father's desk, going through every line of 3 years of financial records, while Samuel Hartwell sat somewhere in the house and did not come to the door. It was mid-afternoon when Blackwood stopped at a page near the back of the third ledger. Eleanor watched his finger pause on a line. She leaned forward. It was a deposit entry. 8 months ago. A significant one larger than any of the quarterly tobacco payments. Marked in her father's handwriting as Land Sale Eastern Parcel Private Arrangement. Eleanor felt the room tilt slightly. "That Eastern Parcel," she said. Her voice was very careful. "That is the parcel along the creek, the one with the water rights attached." Blackwood's finger did not move. "My father told me he said he was considering offers," she said. "He told me nothing had been concluded." "When did he tell you that?" 8 months ago, she said. Blackwood looked up. "This deposit is dated 8 months ago," he said. The room was absolutely silent. Eleanor's hands went flat on the desk surface. "The Eastern Parcel. The water rights. The only reliable water source on the northern end of the property. The thing that made the northern tobacco block viable. The thing she had been managing carefully through 6 weeks of drought, thinking it was still theirs." "Who did he sell it to?" she said. Blackwood turned 2 pages forward in the ledger. He turned the book around and slid it toward her. She looked at the name written there in her father's careful slant. She read it once. She read it again. Then she stood up and she walked to the study door, and she opened it and she said into the hallway in a voice that shook only slightly, "Father, come in here, now." Samuel Hartwell came. He stood in the doorway and looked at his daughter's face and seemed to understand immediately that whatever had been held back for years and years and years was no longer going to be held back. "The Eastern Parcel," Eleanor said. Her father said nothing. "You sold the water rights to the Eastern Parcel 8 months ago," she said, "while telling me you were considering offers, while I was managing the northern block through a drought believing we still had access to that water." Her voice did not rise. It got quieter. "When the drought deepens, when August comes, and that creek runs dry entirely, I will have managed those fields on a false premise. The crops I have been protecting may fail anyway because the water rights we'd need in an emergency no longer belong to us." Samuel's mouth opened. "I needed the money," he said. "Eleanor, the debts." "You lied to me," she said. "I didn't. I omitted." "You lied to me," she said again. "For 8 months, while I worked, while I planned, while I built something real on this land, you let me believe we had resources that you had already sold." "I was going to tell you." "When?" she said. "When the crops failed. When the bank called the note. When was the right moment, Father?" Samuel looked at her. His eyes were red. He had the expression of a man who has run out of the particular kind of courage that lies require and has found himself with nothing left. "I don't know," he said. And for the first time in as long as Eleanor could remember, what her father said was plainly completely true. She looked at him for a long moment. She thought about everything she might say. She thought about what would be honest and what would simply be punishing. She said, "Go sit down somewhere. Don't go far. Mr. Blackwood and I are not finished." Her father went. She turned back to the desk. Blackwood was watching her. There was something in his expression she hadn't seen before. Not the assessment, not the calculation. Something that had come into his face in the last few minutes and not quite left it. "The water rights," she said. She was composing herself. She could feel herself doing it. "Can the bank acquire them back as part of the restructuring?" "Depending on the buyer," he said. "Possibly." "Find out who bought them," she said. "I know who bought them," he said. Something in his voice made her stop. She looked at him. "It was a holding company," he said carefully, "associated with Meridian Bank." The silence lasted a full 10 seconds. "Your bank," she said. "Yes." Eleanor sat down slowly. She thought about that. She thought about what it meant that the bank holding the note on this property had also purchased in a private arrangement the water rights that made the most viable section of the property workable. She thought about what kind of man sat across a desk from her and disclosed that. She thought about what kind of man wouldn't. "Mr. Blackwood," she said. "Yes." "Why are you telling me this?" He held her gaze. "Because you asked me to be honest," he said. "Last night in front of the bookshelves you told me that honest men and rude men are not the same thing. That honest men tell hard truths because truth matters to them." She said nothing. "I am telling you a hard truth," he said. "Because it matters." He paused. "And because you deserve to know the full shape of what you're agreeing to walk into." Eleanor looked at the desk. She looked at the ledger pages. She looked at 3 years of her father's failures written out in careful columns. Then she looked up at Gideon Blackwood. "Can the water rights be returned to the property as part of the restructuring agreement?" she said. "I will make it a condition," he said. "Your bank won't like that." "No," he said, "they won't." "Will they agree?" He looked at her for a long moment. "I'll make them agree," he said. Eleanor breathed. She opened her mouth to say something, what she didn't know yet. Some version of thank you, or I don't trust you, or I don't know what to make of you. And before she could find the words, the study door opened without a knock. Her father came back in. He was holding a letter. He was holding it the way a man holds something he has been carrying for a long time, and has finally run out of the strength to keep carrying alone. "There is something else," Samuel Hartwell said. His voice was the voice of a man past the end of pretending. "There is something I should have told you. Both of you. Months ago." Eleanor stared at him. Blackwood stood slowly. Samuel sat down in the chair against the wall, the one that wasn't at the desk, the one that was essentially the chair of a man who no longer had a position in this room. He set the letter on his knee and pressed his hand flat over it. "The private debt," he said. "The $2,000. I told you it was gambling debts." "Yes," Eleanor said. "Some of it was," her father said, "but not all of it. Some of it." He stopped. His throat worked. "Some of it was a payment I made, to keep a man quiet." He looked at his daughter. "About your mother." The room held absolutely still. Eleanor felt something very old and very deep move in her chest. "What about my mother?" she said. Her father pressed his hand harder against the letter. "She didn't just manage the household, Eleanor. Your mother, in the years before she got sick, she had kept her own set of books, separate from mine. Capital she had managed privately through her own family connections that I never—" He stopped, started again. "When she died, I found them, her books. There was more there than I knew existed, and someone else found them too, or found out about them." His voice was getting thin. "They came to me 2 years after her death. Said they had claims on her estate. Said if I didn't pay them, they'd take it to law. I panicked. I paid them 3 times. Eleanor could not speak. "Your mother's money," her father said. "The money she had set aside. I let it be taken because I was afraid, and because I didn't understand what she had built, and because I didn't handle it the way she would have, the way you would have. He looked at his daughter with eyes that were past apology. I've been losing your mother's legacy for years, and I didn't have the courage to tell you. He held out the letter. Eleanor took it. Her hands were steady. She did not know how they were steady. She read it. She read it twice. Then she looked at Blackwood. These claims, she said, are they legitimate? Let me see, he said quietly. She handed him the letter. She watched his face as he read it. She watched his eyes move line by line, and she watched the expression that came into them, careful and precise and angry, in a way that was very controlled. He looked up. No, he said. They are not legitimate. This is extortion, dressed in legal language, but extortion. He set the letter on the desk between them. He looked at it for a moment. Then he looked at Eleanor. Miss Hartwell, he said, I came to this property to foreclose on a defaulted note. I know, she said. I am no longer certain, he said slowly, that foreclosure is the right action. She looked at him. What I am certain of, he said, is that someone has been systematically extracting value from this property and from your family for years. Not just your father's debts, not just the water rights, this. He touched the letter, and possibly more. The air in the room had changed. Eleanor could feel it. What are you saying? She said. I'm saying. Gideon Blackwood said that before we discuss restructuring terms, I need to know who has been doing this, and why. And whether Meridian Bank, whether people inside Meridian Bank had any knowledge of it. He said that last part, the way a man says something he has already suspected and is only now allowing himself to say aloud. Eleanor stared at him. Are you telling me, she said very carefully, that your own bank may be connected to the extortion of my family? I'm telling you, he said, that I intend to find out. She held his gaze. The study was quiet. Her father sat against the wall with the look of a man who had emptied himself out completely and was waiting to see what would be left standing. Eleanor reached forward and picked up the letter. She folded it carefully. She held it in both hands and felt the weight of everything it meant: her mother, the lost capital, the years of extracted value, all of it, and she made a decision. Then we will find out together, she said. Blackwood looked at her, and this time the thing in his expression was entirely unmistakable. It was not assessment. It was not calculation. It was the look of a man who had come a very long way and not expected to find anything worth staying for. And had. The letter sat on the corner of the desk for the rest of that afternoon. Eleanor kept looking at it. She would be in the middle of a figure, a column total, a cross-reference between the second ledger and the third, and her eyes would move to it without permission. The folded edge. Her father's name written on the outside in a hand she did not recognize. Someone had known exactly what they were doing when they wrote it. Blackwood had taken the third ledger to the far end of the desk and was working through it with a methodical patience that Eleanor recognized because she had it herself. He did not ask unnecessary questions. When he needed clarification, he asked once plainly and listened to the answer without interrupting. She found that she had stopped bracing for him, that the quality of his presence in the room had shifted from something threatening to something she did not have a clean word for. Useful, maybe. That wasn't quite right either. It was nearly 6 in the evening when he set his pen down. There are 3 names, he said. She looked up. 3 names appear in association with the irregular withdrawals, he said. 2 are local. 1 is from Philadelphia. He turned the ledger toward her and pointed to the lines he had marked. Do you recognize them? She leaned forward. The first name she knew. A man named Dawes, who ran a small trading post 8 miles east. She had bought seed from him. She had always found him slippery in a way she could not specifically account for, the kind of man who smiled too readily and held eye contact a beat too long. The second name she did not know. The third name she read twice before she looked up. Harlan Cross, she said. Blackwood watched her face. You know him, he said. He is a partner at Meridian Bank, she said. His name is on the correspondence my father received when the original note was negotiated." The silence was 3 seconds long. "Yes," Blackwood said. "Is he your partner?" she said. "He is a senior partner," Blackwood said. "I am a junior one." She looked at him steadily. "And did you know when you came here that his name was connected to this property?" "No," he said. "I did not." She searched his face. She had become over the last 12 hours better at reading it than she had any right to be. She looked for the particular tightness that came when he was being economical with the truth. She did not find it. "All right," she said. "You believe me," he said. It was not quite a question. "I believe you're angry," she said. "And I don't think you're angry at me." Something moved in his expression that he controlled quickly. "No," he said. "I'm not." He stood. He put his coat back on, which he had removed hours ago, and the formality of the gesture reminded Eleanor of the distance between them that the afternoon's work had quietly closed. She felt it opening again slightly and was irritated at herself for noticing. "I need to send a wire to Philadelphia tonight," he said. "Is there a telegraph office in town?" 12 miles, she said. "There's a rider who goes in on Tuesdays and Fridays." "It's Thursday," he said. "Yes," he thought for a moment. "I'll ride in myself," he said. "Tonight." Eleanor looked at the window. The light was going amber, the particular amber of a summer evening that had burned hot and was cooling badly. "The road is not well marked after dark," she said. "I've ridden worse. There is also," she said carefully, "the question of who else in this county might have an interest in what you found today. If Dawes is involved, he has eyes in this area. A man riding to the telegraph office tonight from this property after a day spent in these ledgers." She did not finish the sentence. He looked at her. She watched him reconsider. She watched it happen in real time, the recalibration, the reassessment. "Tomorrow morning," he said. "Early. I'll have Joseph saddle 2 horses," she said. He stopped. "2," he said. "I'm coming with you," she said. "Miss Hartwell." "The telegraph operator knows my family," she said. "He will be considerably less curious about a message sent by the Hartwell daughter than about a message sent by a stranger from Philadelphia." She held his gaze. "And if Dawes does have eyes on this road, it will look like a routine trip to town, which it will not be." He looked at her for a long moment. "You think quickly," he said. "I have had to," she said. "A beat. 2 horses," he said. "Dawn." He left the study. Eleanor sat alone with the ledgers and the letter and the long quiet of the house settling around her, and she thought about Harlan Cross, and she thought about her mother's books, and she thought about a woman she had loved, who had apparently been building something careful and private and real, and whose work had been picked apart by men after her death as though it were simply something lying unattended. She pressed her hands flat on the desk. She breathed. Then she picked up a fresh piece of paper and began making her own notes. She worked until midnight. The ride to town the next morning took 2 hours. Eleanor set the pace as she had the day before, and Blackwood rode beside her without complaint. They did not talk much on the road. The silence between them had changed character again. It was no longer the silence of strangers tolerating each other. It was the silence of 2 people who had covered considerable ground together and did not need to fill the space with words to prove it. The telegraph operator, a narrow man named Mr. Finch, who had known Eleanor since she was a girl, looked at Blackwood with polite suspicion, looked at Eleanor, and relaxed his shoulders slightly. "Miss Hartwell. Early trip." "Business in town, Mr. Finch," she said. "My associate needs to send a wire to Philadelphia." She used the word deliberately. Associate. She watched Blackwood not react to it and knew he had noticed. Blackwood wrote the message himself. He folded the paper before he handed it to Finch, which meant Eleanor did not read it. She did not ask. She stood at the window and watched the street and thought about what his message likely said. They were back on the road within 20 minutes. It was Blackwood who broke the silence this time, about a mile out of town. "The man Dawes," he said. "How long has he operated in this area?" 12 years roughly, Eleanor said. "He came after the war, set up the trading post. He has a reputation for knowing everyone's business." "Has he ever approached you directly?" "Once," she said. "About 4 years ago. He came to the house. My father wasn't there. He said he had information about some debts my father owed locally and that he wanted to discuss a private arrangement." She paused. "I told him to get off our property." Blackwood was quiet. "He left," he said. "He left," she said. "But he smiled when he did it, like I had done something that confirmed a suspicion." She kept her eyes on the road. "I didn't like the smile." "No," Blackwood said. "I don't imagine you did." "After that I started keeping better records," she said. "More detailed operational notes, more cross-referencing with the household accounts. I didn't know what I was protecting against exactly. I just knew that information was that having it was better than not having it." She felt him look at her. "That instinct," he said, "has probably saved this property." She did not respond to that. She filed it away. They were perhaps 2 miles from the plantation when the sky changed. Eleanor felt it before she saw it, the particular weight in the air, the way the sound of the birds stopped all at once the drop in temperature that was too sudden for afternoon shade. She looked north. The sky above the tree line was the color of iron. "That's not an ordinary storm," she said. Blackwood looked up. "How fast?" "Fast enough," she said. "An hour, maybe less. We need to—" She stopped, because she could see the plantation fields from the road at this point, and what she could see in the northern tobacco block made her chest drop 3 inches. 3 of the field workers were still out there. They had not come in. She moved before she thought about it. She turned her horse off the road at a hard angle, cutting directly through the pasture fence gap she knew was there, and she heard Blackwood's horse come after her without hesitation. She was already calling names before she reached the field edge. "James Thomas, get in." The men looked up. They read the sky the same moment they heard her. They moved fast, the practiced fast of men who knew these fields and had seen Virginia summer storms before gathering tools, shouting to the third man farther down the row. Eleanor was off her horse and helping secure the tool cart, which if it tipped in high wind would damage the young plants around it. She worked fast. Blackwood was beside her in seconds, his hands on the other side of the cart. No questions, no hesitation, just weight and leverage applied in the right direction. "That gate," Eleanor said, nodding. He went to the gate. He threw the latch. James and Thomas and the third man, young Eli, who was 16 and new this season, were running. The first crack of thunder hit when they were halfway to the equipment shed. Eleanor ran. The rain came sideways. It came the way Virginia summer storms came, when they meant it all at once, and without apology, and Eleanor was soaked through before they reached the shed door. She shoved it open. The men tumbled in. Blackwood came in last, and pulled the door shut behind him, and the sound of the storm outside went from a threat to a roar. Everyone stood in the half-dark, breathing hard, dripping. James looked at Eleanor. "Miss Hartwell, the Northfield." "Irrigation channels are clear," she said. "I cleared them last week. The plants will take the water. What we need to watch is the east fence." "There's a post down," Thomas said. "The third one from the gate. I saw it leaning yesterday." Eleanor's jaw tightened. "If that fence goes in this wind," she said mostly to herself, "the livestock get into the Northfield and we lose the whole block." "I'll go," James said. "You'll wait," she said. "Nobody goes out in this." She looked at the shed walls. She listened to the wind. She was calculating, running numbers not of money, but of risk of time, of what could be lost against what could be held. She was not aware that Blackwood was watching her. She became aware of it only when the calculation finished, and she looked up and found his eyes already on her face. "The fence will hold another 20 minutes, she said. "Once the worst of it passes." "I'll take the fence," he said. "Mr. Blackwood." "I'll take it," he said again, not loudly, just with the flat finality of a man who has made a decision. James looked between the two of them. Thomas studied the floor. Young Eli watched with his mouth slightly open. "You don't know where it is," Eleanor said. "Then come with me and show me," he said. She looked at him. She thought about arguing. She thought about the north field. 20 minutes, she said. They waited 20 minutes. When the worst of the wind dropped to something survivable, they went. Eleanor led, and Blackwood was 2 steps behind her the whole way, and the rain was still heavy, but no longer horizontal, and the ground was mud and pooled water, and she lost her footing once on a slope, and his hand caught her elbow before she had processed that she was falling. She righted herself without comment. His hand dropped. They found the fence post. He was right that it had leaned. It had also partially split at the base, which was worse. Eleanor crouched down and felt the split and thought about what she had in the equipment shed to work with. "We can't fix it tonight," she said. "But we can brace it. There's rope in the shed." "I saw it," he said. He had already turned back. He returned with the rope in 4 minutes. She held the post while he tied it off to the adjacent standing post and to the nearest fence rail, a temporary brace that would not survive a second storm but would hold through the night. His hands worked fast and sure. She watched them. She thought about hands that looked like they belonged to a man who had done physical work before he was a man of finance. "You were a soldier," she said, "before the bank." He finished the knot before he answered. 7 years, he said. "The war. And before it," he said. He sat back on his heels and looked at the brace. "Satisfied?" She let go of the post. It held. She breathed. The rain was easing. The sky above them still moved fast, but the iron color was breaking up into something that was merely gray. Around them the field steamed gently with the particular smell of soaked Virginia summer earth that Eleanor had known her whole life. She stood up and pushed her wet hair back from her face, and did not think about how she looked, because that was not the kind of thing she allowed herself to spend attention on. "Thank you," she said. He stood. "You held the post," he said. "You brought the rope." A beat. She almost smiled. She did not. They walked back toward the main house together slower, now that the urgency had passed, and the quiet between them was the particular quiet that comes after shared physical effort, honest and unguarded in a way that conversations rarely managed. It was Blackwood who spoke first. "Tell me about your mother," he said. Eleanor kept walking. "Why?" she said. "Because she built something," he said. "Private capital. Her own books, family connections used carefully. That takes years. And it takes intelligence and discipline. And someone took it apart after she died." He paused. "I want to understand what it was before I can understand how it was taken." Eleanor was quiet for 3 steps. "She was from a merchant family in Baltimore," she said finally. "Her father traded in dry goods. She grew up understanding accounts before she could read well. She told me once that numbers were the language men used to tell the truth about themselves, whether they meant to or not." Eleanor paused. "She married my father when she was 19. She loved him. I believe that. But she was not a woman who gave all of herself over to any one thing, including love. She kept her own resources," he said. "She kept her own counsel," Eleanor said. "The resources were part of that. She had a small inheritance from her father that she managed quietly reinvested, grew carefully over 20 years. She never talked about it openly. She told me once when I was about 14 that a woman with nothing of her own was entirely at the mercy of circumstances, and that circumstances were not reliable." Eleanor's voice stayed steady. "She died when I was 17. I didn't know about the books she had kept until my father mentioned them yesterday." The sentence landed with all its weight. Blackwood was quiet. "She didn't tell you," he said. "She may have intended to," Eleanor said. "She got sick fast. At the end, there wasn't much time for anything except the fact of it." She breathed. "Or perhaps she thought she had more time. We usually do." They were near the house now. "Harlan Cross," she said. "How long has he been at Meridian?" 15 years, Blackwood said. and he would have had access to estate records, to the kind of legal correspondence that surfaces when someone dies and leaves private capital unaccounted for. "Yes," Blackwood said, and the word was careful. "Is that how they found her books?" Eleanor said. "Through the bank." Blackwood stopped walking. She stopped too. She turned to look at him. He had an expression on his face that she had not seen before, something that was past careful and past controlled, something that was working its way toward an honest answer through what appeared to be genuine difficulty. "I don't know," he said, "but I think it's possible, and if it is—" He stopped. If Harlan Cross used his position at Meridian to identify and then systematically extract value from an estate that he had no legal claim to over a period of years, that is not a civil matter. "What is it?" she said. "It is a crime," he said flatly. Eleanor looked at him. "And he is your senior partner," she said. "Yes." "Whom you are now investigating?" "Yes." She held his gaze. "Mr. Blackwood," she said, "what happens to you if you are right?" He was quiet for a long moment. "That depends," he said, "on whether I can prove it before he realizes what I'm doing." The rain had stopped entirely now. The air was cool and clean and smelled of wet grass and the distant tobacco fields. Eleanor stood in it and looked at a man who had come to this property to foreclose on her family and had instead discovered that her family had been robbed and who was now proposing to investigate his own institution to prove it. She thought about trust, about the things it required. She thought about how much of her life she had spent not trusting anyone with the full weight of what she knew and what she feared, because there had been no one who could carry it without dropping it. "Tell me what you need from me," she said. He looked at her. "The letter your father gave us," he said. "The extortion correspondence. I need to trace the delivery who brought it, what route it came by, whether there is any physical connection to Cross or to Dawes." "I can talk to Joseph," she said. "He receives all the post. He'll remember." "I also need your mother's name," he said, "her full maiden name, and her father's name, and the name of the Baltimore family." "Margaret Ann Callison," Eleanor said. "Her father was Robert Callison, the Callison Trading Company, Baltimore." He repeated it under his breath, setting it. "There's one more thing," he said. "Ask. Your operational records," he said. "All 6 years of them. I need to go through them the same way we went through the ledgers today. If there is a pattern to the extraction, if Dawes or Cross were timing their moves against your family's most vulnerable periods, it may show in the operational data. The crop cycles, the labor costs, the yield fluctuations." Eleanor looked at him. "You think they were watching the farm," she said. "Waiting for the right moments. I think," he said, "that $2,000 extracted over 3 years in irregular amounts timed to periods of cash shortfall does not happen by accident." The thought settled on her like a physical weight. "Someone was feeding them information," she said. "Yes," he said. "About our finances, about our vulnerable periods." "Yes." She thought about Dawes and his smile. She thought about the 4 years since she had told him to leave, and all the small ways information moved in a rural county, the feed merchant, the labor exchange, the conversations at Sunday services. "That is going to make me very angry," she said. "Yes," he said. "I imagine it will." "I would like to get angry later," she said, "when it's useful. Right now I need to think." He looked at her with that thing in his expression again. "All right," he said. She went inside and got her records. They spent the evening at the dining table, her 6 years of operational notebooks laid out in order, Blackwood working through them with the same methodical patience as the ledgers. Eleanor sat across from him and answered questions and pointed to relevant entries and felt slowly and with considerable resistance the full shape of what had been done to her family coming clear. It was 9 o'clock when Blackwood found the first timing match. He set his pen down and looked at the page and then looked at Eleanor. "August 1814, he said. "Your yield notes indicate a significant crop loss in the Eastern Bloc due to early blight. You recorded a 30% reduction in projected income." "I remember," she said. 6 weeks after that notation, he said, There is a withdrawal in the ledger of $300, marked as equipment repair, which your records indicate was not spent on equipment. No, she said. In November of the same year, he said, your notes indicate that your father took a short-term loan from a local source to cover labor costs. Your records have a question mark next to the lender's name because you could not confirm who it was. Yes, she said, and she felt cold. In the ledger, he said that loan is recorded as coming from a private individual. The initials given are D.W. D.W. Dawes. Eleanor put her hands flat on the table. He lent my father money, she said, while he was simultaneously extracting payments from him through the extortion. It appears so, Blackwood said, creating dependency on one side and liability on the other simultaneously. A very controlled arrangement. How long? She said. He looked at the records. The earliest timing correlation I can find, he said, is late 1812. Eleanor did the arithmetic. 5 years. For 5 years someone had been watching this property timing moves against her family, building a structure of debt and dependency and fear, and she had been walking the fence line every morning and running the numbers every night and fighting for every inch of what she was building, and she had not seen it. She had not seen it. She pressed her hands harder against the table. Eleanor, Blackwood said. It was the first time he had used her given name. She looked up. His face was direct and steady. This is not something you missed, he said. This was designed to be invisible, to look like ordinary misfortune, ordinary failures of an ordinary struggling farm. He paused. What you built here in spite of it that is not ordinary. She looked at him for a long moment. She wanted to say something sharp. She wanted to push the sentiment back because she did not have the practice of receiving it, and it made her feel exposed in a way she did not like. Instead, she said very quietly, 6 years. Yes, he said. And it still may not be enough, she said. It is enough, he said, to fight with. She breathed. Outside, the summer night had settled over the property in that particular way it had. After a storm clean and still and full of insect sound, the world reorganized and continuing. Eleanor could hear it through the window. She had heard it her whole life. She thought about her mother. She thought about a woman who had told a 14-year-old girl that circumstances were not reliable, and a woman needed something of her own. She thought about the careful private work of 20 years. The books that had been found and picked apart by men who thought the dead had no defenders. Mr. Blackwood, she said. Yes. My mother's capital, she said. What was extracted? Is it recoverable through law? He considered it. If we can establish the extortion, and if we can connect Cross and Dawes formally, he said, then there is a basis for civil recovery. It would not be fast. It would not be simple. He paused. But yes, in principle. In principle, she said. In practice, he said, it would require a lawyer. It would require testimony. It would require your father to acknowledge what happened publicly, which will be difficult for him. Everything has been difficult for him, Eleanor said evenly, and he has chosen consistently to make the difficulty my problem rather than his own. That pattern ends now. Blackwood looked at her. Yes, he said quietly. I believe it does. She began to gather the notebooks. She stacked them in order the way she always did. 6 years of mornings and numbers and fence line walks and held back anger. 6 years of holding something together that someone else had been quietly undermining. She was stacking the last one when Blackwood said, "The wire I sent this morning, to Philadelphia." She looked up. "I did not send it to the bank," he said. She went still. "I sent it to a solicitor I trust," he said. "A man independent of Meridian. I asked him to make discreet inquiries about Harlan Cross's personal dealings over the past 5 years, financial, legal, and otherwise." He paused. "If Cross knows I'm looking, I want to know what he does next. And I want someone outside the bank holding that knowledge in case anything interferes with my ability to act on it." Eleanor set the last notebook down. She looked at him directly. "You're protecting the investigation," she said. From your own partners. Yes, he said. That is a significant thing, she said. To do. Yes, he said. It puts you at considerable risk. Yes, he said again. She looked at this man. She thought about everything he had been from the moment he walked in through the door and looked at the water stain above the frame. The hard eyes, the flat assessment, the silence that had felt like judgment and turned out to be something else. She thought about the rope and the fence post in the rain. She thought about him saying her given name once and then not again. She thought about what it meant that a man who had come here to take something had instead stayed to fight for something. She did not say any of that. She said, "Then we had better not waste the time we have." He looked at her, and the thing in his expression that she had been filing away and refusing to examine all day, all evening, all of the long, complicated hours since the storm broke open. The afternoon that thing was fully visible now in the lamplight, and it was not assessment, and it was not calculation. It was something that made Eleanor Hartwell, who had spent her entire adult life being exactly practical and exactly unsentimental, look away first. She gathered her notebooks. She said goodnight. She climbed the stairs, and at the top of the stairs she stood very still for a moment, with her hands on the railing and her notebooks against her chest, and she thought about all the things she could not afford, and she thought about all the things she was about to fight for, and she thought about how a woman who had built 6 years of careful records in the dark was not entirely sure she knew what to do with the feeling that someone had finally come and read them. She went to her room. She did not sleep well. Neither, she suspected, did he. The reply from Philadelphia arrived on the 5th day. Blackwood had been at Hartwell for 4 days by then, and the property had quietly reorganized itself around his presence in a way that Eleanor noticed and did not remark on. He rose before dawn. He ate what Martha put in front of him without comment or complaint. He worked through the mornings at the dining table with the ledgers and Eleanor's operational notebooks spread between them, and he rode the property in the afternoons with the focused attention of a man who was recalculating something large and doing it carefully. The household watched him. Joseph watched him most with the quiet, assessing patience of a man who had spent 40 years reading people who came through that door. Eleanor caught Joseph's eye on the second morning, and Joseph gave her a very small nod that meant something she chose not to interpret too precisely. Her father stayed largely in his room. He came down for meals. He sat at the head of the table out of habit and the force of a lifetime of doing so, and he spoke when spoken to and otherwise kept his eyes on his plate. Eleanor watched him across the table and felt the full, complicated weight of what she felt about him, which was not simple hatred and not simple love, but something built of too many years of both to separate cleanly. On the third evening, Blackwood had knocked on the study door where Eleanor was working and said without preamble, "Your father needs something to do." She looked up. "I beg your pardon?" "A man with nothing to do," he said, "turns his attention inward. That is not useful for him or for you. He knows this property, 40 years of it. There are things he remembers that are not in any ledger." Eleanor looked at him for a long moment. "Are you telling me to put my father to work?" she said. "I'm telling you he still has something to contribute," Blackwood said, "whether you want him to or not." She had thought about it that night. The next morning she had gone to her father's room and knocked, and when he answered she had said, "I need you to walk the southern fence with me and tell me everything you remember about the original property surveys, the boundary lines, who witnessed them, any disputes that were recorded." Samuel had stared at her. Then he had gotten up and put his boots on. They had walked the southern fence together for 2 hours. He had talked. He had remembered things she hadn't known. A boundary dispute settled in 1803. A handshake agreement with the neighboring property owner that had never been formally recorded. A deed notation her grandfather had made that her father had never fully understood, and that Eleanor, hearing it now, understood immediately. She had not thanked him, but she had listened. And Samuel Hartwell, for the first time in longer than Eleanor could measure, had walked his own land like a man with a reason to be on it. She had reported back to Blackwood that evening. "The deed notation," he said, leaning forward. She told him. He was quiet for a moment. Then, that may affect the water rights question significantly. If the original deed contained an easement clause for the eastern parcel's water access, the sale your father made may not have been legally complete. Eleanor stared at him. Meaning the bank may not actually own those water rights, she said. Meaning the transfer may be contestable, he said carefully. It is not certain, but it is a line of argument. She had sat with that for 2 days. Now it was the 5th morning, and Joseph brought the letter to the dining table where they were working, and set it beside Blackwood's coffee cup. And Blackwood looked at the handwriting on the outside, and picked it up without urgency, but with the particular stillness of a man picking up something that might change everything. Eleanor kept her eyes on the ledger page in front of her. She heard him break the seal. She heard the paper open. She waited. After 2 minutes, he set the letter down. "Cross has been moving money," he said. She looked up. "In the past 3 weeks," Blackwood said, and his voice was very controlled. "Since I sent notification to the bank that I was traveling to Virginia on the Hartwell account, Harlan Cross has made 4 transfers of significant capital out of Meridian's private accounts. 2 to accounts in New York. 2 to accounts that my solicitor has not yet been able to trace." Eleanor felt the implications land one by one. "He knew you were coming here," she said. "Yes." "And he is moving assets," she said, "in anticipation of something." "Yes." "He thinks you're going to find what we found," she said. Blackwood looked at her. "He may already know we found it," he said quietly. The dining room went absolutely still. Eleanor set her pen down. "Dawes," she said. "It would be the logical channel," Blackwood said. "If Dawes has been the local instrument of this arrangement for 5 years, he would still be watching this property. He would have seen me arrive. He would have seen me stay past the first day. He would have had 4 days to send word." Eleanor thought about the road to town. She thought about who they had passed. She thought about Mr. Finch at the telegraph office and his polite, incurious eyes. "Mr. Finch," she said. Blackwood looked at her. "He was pleasant," she said carefully. "When we came in, he asked no questions. He did not look at your message." She paused. "Mr. Finch always asks questions. He is the most naturally curious man in the county. He has asked me questions since I was 6 years old." She looked at Blackwood. "He asked none that morning." Blackwood was very still. "Because he already knew what he needed to know," he said. "Or," she said, "because he was being careful not to show that he did." A beat. "Miss Hartwell," he said, "how many people in this county do you genuinely trust?" She thought about it honestly. "Joseph," she said. "Martha. Clara, the woman you saw at the tenant house. Thomas, who helped in the storm. James." She paused. "The Reverend Marsh with reservations." 6 people, he said. "This is not a world," she said evenly, "that has given me a great deal of practice at trust." He looked at her for a moment. "No," he said. "I don't suppose it has." He stood and moved to the window and stood with his back to the room for perhaps 30 seconds, which was the Gideon Blackwood equivalent of pacing. Then he turned. "I have to go back to Philadelphia," he said. The words hit Eleanor squarely in the chest. She did not let it show. "When?" she said. "Within the week," he said. "If Cross is moving capital, I have a narrow window to act. My solicitor can initiate proceedings, but I need to be present. I need to be at the bank. I need to be in the room." He came back to the table. "If I am not there in person to counter what Cross is doing, the evidence we have built here will not be enough. He has 15 years of relationships at that institution. I have 3. She understood the logic. She understood it, and she hated it. "What happens to the note?" she said. "While you're in Philadelphia?" "I will formally suspend the foreclosure proceedings before I leave," he said. "I have the authority to do that. It will give you 90 days. 90 days, she said. "And when I have dealt with Cross, if," she said. He looked at her. "If you have dealt with Cross," she said, "and if Meridian agrees to restructure, and if the water rights can be contested. There are a great many contingencies, Mr. Blackwood." "Yes?" he said. There are. And in the meantime, she said, I run this property on 90 days of suspended foreclosure with a man named Dawes who has been watching us for 5 years and who now knows that we know. She said it flat. She was not asking him to reassure her. She was naming the reality so they were both looking at the same thing. He was quiet for a moment. Yes, he said. That is the situation. She breathed. Then I had better get to work, she said. She picked her pen back up. He looked at her for a long moment before he sat back down. The following morning, Eleanor rode to see Thomas Deary. Old Thomas lived 3 miles west in a farmhouse he had occupied since before her father was born. He received Eleanor on his porch with the easy warmth of a man who had known her all her life and had never once made her feel like a problem. She told him everything, not because she needed an ally, though she did, because Thomas Deary had known her grandfather, and her grandfather had negotiated the original property surveys, and the deed notation her father had mentioned might mean everything or nothing, and she needed someone with an old man's memory to tell her which. Thomas listened with his hands flat on his knees and his eyes on the middle distance. When she finished, he was quiet for a moment. Your grandfather was a very careful man, Thomas said. The water easement. I was there when he wrote it in. 1801. He said to me, Thomas, any man who sells land connected to water should keep the right to drink from it. He called it a survival clause. Eleanor's hands tightened on her reins. Is it in the original deed? She said. It's in the deed and it's in the county register, Thomas said. I witnessed both. He looked at her directly. Any sale of that eastern parcel without the buyer acknowledging and explicitly waiving that clause is incomplete under Virginia land law. Your grandfather knew that. He drafted it specifically so his children couldn't accidentally give the water away. Eleanor breathed. Thomas, she said, I need you to write that down. Everything you just told me, dated and signed. I'll do it today, he said. She rode home with Thomas Deary's testimony forming in her mind, like the skeleton of something that was going to be eventually a building. Blackwood was waiting on the porch when she came back. She could tell from the set of his shoulders that something had happened. What? She said before she was fully off the horse. Dawes came to the property, he said. She stopped. He came to the front door, Blackwood said. An hour ago. He asked for your father. Did he see my father? Your father came to the door before I could prevent it, Blackwood said, and something tight was in his voice that was past controlled. Samuel spoke with him for approximately 3 minutes. I was in the hall. I heard what I could. What did Dawes say? He told your father, Blackwood said carefully, that there were people in Philadelphia who were very interested in the current situation at Hartwell, that those people were willing to offer your father a private settlement, his personal debts, cleared a small income, a clean departure in exchange for his cooperation with a legal challenge to the bank's restructuring. Eleanor stared at him. He came to buy my father, she said. He came to turn your father, Blackwood said, to use him as a witness against the restructuring, against any legal challenge to the water rights transfer, against everything we've built this week. She thought about Samuel Hartwell at the door. Tired and ashamed and carrying $2,000 of guilt and a lifetime of bad decisions. She thought about how that offer would have sounded to a man in that condition. What did my father say? She said. Blackwood looked at her. He said he needed to speak with his daughter first, he said. The breath went out of Eleanor slowly. She looked at the ground for a moment. Then she looked back up. Where is he now? She said. The study. She handed her horse's reins to Joseph, who had appeared silently at the right moment, as he always did, and she walked into the house and down the hall and opened the study door. Her father was sitting at the desk, not behind it in the chair of authority, in the side chair, the chair against the wall. He looked up when she came in. He looked, she thought, like a man who had just been tested in a very precise way and was not entirely sure how he had performed. He offered you a way out, she said. Yes, her father said. And you told him you needed to speak with me first. Yes. She looked at him. Why? she said, not with accusation. She genuinely wanted to know. Samuel was quiet for a long moment. He looked at his hands. He looked at the desk that had been his and was no longer entirely his and might not be his much longer. He looked at his daughter who had walked his land before dawn every morning for 6 years and fixed what he had broken and held what he had let go, and not once had she left. Because, he said slowly, you are the only person in this situation who is fighting for something real. He paused. And I have spent enough of my life working against real things. The room was very quiet. Eleanor sat down. She sat in the chair across from her father. The chair she had sat in across from Blackwood when this had all begun, and she folded her hands in her lap, and she looked at Samuel Hartwell the way she had not let herself look at him in years. Not with the anger first, but underneath it, at what was there before the anger. If you cooperate with Dawes, she said, we lose everything, not just the restructuring, the legal challenge to the water rights, the case against Cross. Everything we have built this week becomes something they can dismantle. I know, he said. And you would lose whatever they offered you too, she said. Because men like Dawes offer things they never intend to deliver. That is how they operate. I know that too, he said. He looked at her. Eleanor, I know I have given you very little reason to believe that I can hold to a hard decision. She said nothing. But I am asking you to believe it now, he said. Not because I deserve that belief, because I am trying to earn a small part of it back. She looked at her father for a long time. She thought about what it cost him to say that. She thought about what it would cost her to refuse it. Then I need you to do something, she said. Today. Not tomorrow. Today. Name it, he said. I need you to write a full account, she said. Every payment made to Dawes, every communication, every amount, every date, everything you can remember, signed and dated. She held his gaze. And I need you to write it knowing that it will likely be used in a legal proceeding, that it will become public, that it will be the most honest document you have ever put your name to. Samuel's face moved through several things. Then he reached across the desk and picked up a pen. Bring me paper, he said. She brought him paper. She sat in the room while he wrote. He wrote for 3 hours. Eleanor did not read it over his shoulder. She sat in the room and worked on her own notes and let him have the privacy of the act. She listened to his pen move across the page and the occasional long pause and the sound of a man constructing honesty out of years of the opposite. When he was done, he held the pages out to her. She took them. She read them standing. It was more than she had expected. He had gone further back than she asked. Back to the first contact with Dawes. Back to the earliest loan. Back to the introduction that had come through. She stopped at that line and read it again through a letter of introduction from Harlan Cross. She looked up. Cross introduced Dawes to you, she said. 4 years before I signed the note with Meridian. Her father said quietly. I did not at the time. I had no reason to connect them. Cross was the bank. Dawes was local. It seemed coincidence. It was not coincidence, she said. No, her father said. I understand that now. She took the pages to Blackwood. He read them at the dining table standing, and she watched his face as he read. And she watched the moment he found the same line she had found. He set the pages down. He looked at her. This is the connection, he said. Cross to Dawes established years before the note, before the extortion letters, before the water rights sale. He pressed his hand flat on the pages. This is not opportunism. This is a deliberate arrangement from the beginning. Your family was targeted specifically. Why? She said. Because your mother's capital was identified as an unprotected asset, he said. After her death in an estate with a financially unreliable husband and a minor daughter, there was no one to defend it properly, no legal advocate, no male representative with the standing to challenge a bank. He looked at her. They waited until she died, and then they moved. Eleanor felt something cold and clear settle through her. They killed nothing, she said. They only waited. Yes, he said. And they thought, She said that there would still be no one to defend it. She said it quietly. Blackwood looked at her across the table and did not look away. "They miscalculated," he said. That evening, 3 things happened in sequence that changed the next morning entirely. The first was a note that arrived from town, brought by a boy Eleanor did not recognize, addressed to Blackwood in a hand she had not seen before. He read it and said nothing for a moment, and then said quietly, "My solicitor has traced one of the New York transfers. It went to a land speculation firm, one that has been purchasing distressed properties in Virginia and the Carolinas over the past 2 years. Eleanor stared at him. "How many properties?" 14 recorded, he said. "Possibly more. 14 families, 14 properties like hers." Eleanor thought about that and felt the cold go deeper. The second thing was Joseph, who came to the back door and spoke to Eleanor in a low voice for 4 minutes. He told her that Dawes had been seen on the road past the south fence twice that afternoon. Not stopping. Just passing. The way a man passes when he wants to be seen passing. She told Blackwood. Blackwood's jaw tightened once. "He's making sure we know he's watching," Blackwood said. "He wants us to feel the pressure." "Does it change your timeline?" she said. "It moves it forward," he said. "I need to leave the day after tomorrow." She nodded once. The third thing happened at 10 o'clock at night, when Eleanor was coming down the stairs, and Blackwood was crossing the entry hall below, and they nearly ran into each other at the bottom step. She caught the banister. He stopped. They were very close. The lamp on the hall table was the only light. They looked at each other. Eleanor was tired in a way that went past the body. Tired the way you get when you have been holding something enormous for a very long time, and someone has finally come and put their hands on the other side of it, not to take it, but just to share the weight, and you have allowed that, and the allowing has cost you something you did not expect. She watched him look at her. She watched something move in his face that was not controlled and not calculated, and not the flat gray patience she had learned to read. She did not look away from it. She had spent her whole life looking at hard things directly. It was wanting, careful and honest and real. "Blackwood," she said. "Yes," he said. His voice was very quiet. "When you go to Philadelphia," she said, "what are the chances you succeed?" He looked at her for a long moment. "Honest answer," he said. "Always," she said. "Even," he said. "Perhaps slightly better with your father's testimony." She breathed. "And if you don't succeed," she said, "what happens here?" "Then the foreclosure resumes after 90 days, he said. "And you fight it through the courts if you can with Thomas Deary's testimony and the deed notation. It will be a harder fight without the bank's cooperation, but it is not an impossible one." She nodded. "And cross," she said. "If I can't prove it through Meridian," he said, "there are other avenues, slower, more expensive, but available." She looked at him steadily. "I need you to come back," she said. It came out more plainly than she intended. She did not take it back. He looked at her. Something passed between them in that moment that was too large for the narrow hallway, and too important to rush and too dangerous to pretend was not happening. "Eleanor," he said. Second time he had used her name. She counted them. "I know," she said quickly. "I know that is, I'm not asking for a promise. I am not asking for anything you cannot give." She held his gaze. "I am simply telling you plainly that there are things here worth coming back to, that I am one of them, and that I have never said that to anyone in my life, and I am saying it now because we are apparently both people who find honesty useful." He did not move. He looked at her with that thing fully visible in his face. Then he said, "I will come back." 3 words. She believed them. She did not let herself examine why she believed them with the same certainty that she ran numbers in the dark. She simply filed it away in the place where she kept the things that mattered. "Good night," she said. She went back up the stairs. At the top, she did not pause. She went to her room and closed the door and sat on the edge of her bed and pressed her hands against her knees and breathed. 90 days. She had 90 days, and her father's testimony, and Thomas Deary's memory, and 6 years of operational records, and a man riding north in 2 days who had promised to come back. She had built everything she had ever built from less. She got up. She went to her desk. She lit the lamp. She opened her notebook to a fresh page and began to plan. He had been gone 41 days when the first letter arrived. Eleanor was in the northern field when Joseph brought it to her, walking out from the house with the careful, unhurried pace that meant it was important, but not an emergency. She took it without breaking her conversation with James about the irrigation channel repair, finished what she was saying, and then stepped away and opened it. Blackwood's handwriting was like him, direct, no wasted space. The solicitor has confirmed 3 of the 4 transfers. Cross knows I am moving. He has engaged his own legal counsel. This will not be resolved quietly. You should prepare for the possibility that his people will make contact with you directly. Do not meet with anyone from Meridian without independent counsel present. I am working on the water rights documentation. Thomas Deary's signed testimony has been received and is being reviewed. Your father's account has been reviewed by my solicitor. He says it is the most useful document he has seen in 20 years of this work. Hold the line. GB. She read it twice. She folded it and put it in her apron pocket and went back to James. The channel repair, she said. I want it done by Friday. Yes, ma'am, James said. She walked the fence line that evening with the letter still in her pocket, and she thought about a man in Philadelphia who was fighting something large and complex and dangerous on her behalf. And she thought about the 41 days she had spent since his horse disappeared down the long drive, and she measured what those days had cost her and what they had built. She had done a great deal in 41 days. The roof repairs on the 3 tenant houses were finished. She had authorized the work the morning after Blackwood left, drawing from the household account and documenting every cent with the precision that was simply her nature. Clara had stood in her doorway and looked at the new timber over her head and said very quietly, "Thank you, Miss Hartwell." And Eleanor had said, "It should have been done 7 months ago." And Clara had said, "Yes." But it wasn't. And now it is. The labor arrears had been paid from a source Eleanor had not expected. She had found it herself in the 4th week after Blackwood left, going through the oldest set of household accounts. She had never been given access to her mother's household ledger from 1809, discovered in a box in the attic that her father had not opened in 8 years. The ledger had led her to a notation, and the notation had led her to a letter, and the letter had led her to a small account at a Baltimore bank in her mother's maiden name that had not been found by Cross or Dawes, because her mother had opened it under a variation of her name that only the Baltimore family would have recognized. $430. Eleanor had sat in the attic with that ledger in her lap for 20 minutes. Then she had climbed down, saddled her horse, ridden to town, and sent a letter to the Baltimore bank herself. The money arrived 12 days later. She paid the labor arrears in full, every cent. She did it on a Friday, so the workers would have it going into the weekend, and she stood in the yard while Joseph distributed the envelopes. And she watched the faces of men and women who had been owed this for months, and something moved in her chest that she let herself feel for exactly 1 minute and then set aside. There was too much work. The second letter from Blackwood arrived on the 53rd day. It was longer than the first. Cross has made a formal challenge to my standing at the bank. He is claiming that my conduct on the Hartwell account constitutes a conflict of interest and that any evidence I have gathered is compromised. The board is divided. 3 members support him, 2 support me, 2 are undecided. My solicitor believes the undecided members will follow the money, which means we need to demonstrate that the value of pursuing this legally outweighs the cost of the conflict. I am making that argument. It is not a fast argument. I need more time. Do not let anyone pressure you into any agreement on the property until you hear from me. If Dawes comes to the property again, document it. Date time what was said, who witnessed it. Send that documentation to my solicitor directly, not through the bank. I am including his address. GB. And then, at the bottom of the page, below the solicitor's address, in slightly different ink, as though added after, "How are the northern fields?" She had looked at those 4 words for a long time. she wrote back the same day. She told him about the northern fields. She told him the yield projection was running 8% above her conservative estimate and 11% below her optimistic one. She told him about the labor arrears being settled and the roof repairs being completed. She told him about her mother's Baltimore account and the $430 and what she had done with it. She told him about Dawes. He had come twice more. Once to the front road, stopping his horse at the gate and standing there for 5 minutes without approaching, which was a message delivered without words. Once to the trading post in town, when Eleanor was there for supplies, appearing at the end of the aisle with his ready smile and saying, "Miss Hartwell, how are things at the plantation? I hear your banker friend has left." Eleanor had looked at him for 1 full second. She had said, "Mr. Dawes, I am going to ask you to step back because you are standing between me and the flour I need, and I have a long list today." He had stepped back. The smile had stayed, but something behind it had shifted the way things shift when a man realizes his pressure is not landing where he expected. She had bought her flour and left. She wrote all of it in the letter. She sent it to Philadelphia and went back to work. The days passed, the way hard-working summer days passed, fast in the doing and long in the remembering. She rose before dawn and walked the fence line and managed the fields and kept the accounts and ran the tenant farm school 3 afternoons a week, and at night she sat with her notebooks and planned for what came next. She thought about Blackwood less than she expected to and more than she wanted to. She thought about the hallway and the lamplight, and 3 words delivered with the flat certainty of a man who kept his commitments. She thought about what she had said, and the manner in which she had said it, and the fact that she did not regret saying it, which was itself an unusual thing for Eleanor Hartwell, who generally found things to regret if she looked hard enough. She did not look hard enough at that particular thing. She was afraid of what she might find. On the 68th day the trouble came. It did not come from Dawes. It came from a man she had never met who arrived at the front door in a good coat with a leather case and introduced himself as Mr. Gerald Fitch, attorney, representing certain interests in the matter of the Hartwell property debt. He was not from Meridian Bank. He was from a firm in Richmond. Eleanor received him in the parlor with Joseph standing in the hall within earshot, which was not accidental. Fitch had papers. He set them on the parlor table with the practiced ease of a man who did this regularly and found it congenial. He explained with professional warmth that his clients had acquired the Hartwell note from Meridian Bank in a private transfer dated 4 days ago. Eleanor looked at the papers. She looked at them for a long time. "The note has been transferred," she said. "Yes, Miss Hartwell. Sold to a private investment group as is standard practice with distressed, on whose authority at Meridian," she said. Fitch paused. "The transaction was authorized by a senior partner. Named Cross," she said. Fitch's professional warmth developed a small crack. "I'm not in a position to confirm the internal—" "The note was sold," Eleanor said, "4 days ago, while it is under a formal suspension of foreclosure proceedings authorized by a Meridian partner in good standing." She looked at him directly. "That suspension has 62 days remaining. A note transfer during an active suspension period requires written notification to the debtor with 14 days response time under Virginia law." She held out her hand. "I do not see that notification in your papers." The crack in Fitch's warmth became something more like a fracture. "Miss Hartwell, Furthermore," she said, "the note as currently structured contains terms that are under formal legal challenge connected to the originating bank's conduct. Any purchaser acquiring this note did so with either full knowledge of that challenge, which makes the purchase a deliberate obstruction, or without knowledge, which makes the purchase uninformed." She held his gaze. "Either way, the papers you have brought me today do not constitute a legal demand I am required to respond to before consulting independent counsel." She stood up. "I will have those documents reviewed," she said, "and I will respond through proper legal channels within the 14 days I am owed." She picked up the papers. "Good afternoon, Mr. Fitch." Fitch left. Eleanor waited until she heard his horse on the drive. Then she sat back down and pressed her hands flat on her knees and breathed through the shaking that came now that there was no one to see it. Joseph appeared in the parlor door. "Miss Hartwell," he said. "You all right?" "Get me paper," she said. "And send Thomas Deary a message. Tell him I need him here tomorrow morning." "Yes, ma'am." She wrote to Blackwood that night. She wrote fast and plain. She told him about Fitch and the transferred note and the Richmond firm. She told him what she had said and what she had not said. She told him she needed to know who the investment group was and whether they were connected to the 14 other properties his solicitor had identified. She sealed it and sent it with the Tuesday Rider and went to bed. She slept 4 hours. The reply came back in 8 days. It came with 2 other letters, one from Blackwood's solicitor, formal and legal and dense with language she had to read twice, and one from Blackwood himself. She read his first. "Cross moved the note to cut me out. If the note is held by a private firm, my standing at Meridian becomes irrelevant to your situation." That is what he intended. What he did not intend is that moving the note also moves the associated evidence of fraud out of the bank's internal jurisdiction and into civil law, where I have considerably more room. My solicitor is filing a formal challenge to the transfer on grounds of procedural violation and conflict of interest. The 14-day window you invoked was correct and buys time. The investment group is the same land speculation firm connected to the other 14 properties. We now have a direct line between Crossdawes, the extortion of your family, and a coordinated scheme to acquire distressed Virginia properties. This is no longer a personal matter. It is a criminal one. I have been to the Attorney General's office in Philadelphia. They are interested. I am coming back to Virginia. I will be there in 10 days. She read it once. She folded it. She held it in both hands for a moment, the way she had held her mother's letter from the attic. Then she stood up and went to find Thomas Deary. He arrived the next morning as she had asked, and she showed him Blackwood's letter. Not all of it, the relevant portions, and Thomas read it with his hands on his knees and then looked up at her. "Your young man's been busy," he said. "He is not my young man," she said automatically. Thomas made the sound of a man who has known a family for a very long time and therefore has opinions he is choosing generously not to express at this moment. "The Attorney General," Thomas said. "That's federal. That's serious." "Yes," she said. "And Cross knows this is coming." "He moved the note 4 days before the letter was written," she said. "So he knew something was coming. Whether he knows the full scope." She paused. "Probably not yet." "But Dawes might," Thomas said. She looked at him. "Dawes is the local instrument," she said. "If Cross panics, he calls Dawes. And if Dawes is called, he'll do something," Thomas said. "Before he can't." They looked at each other. "What do you need from me?" Thomas said. "Stay close," she said. "I may need a witness." "I've been a witness for this family before," he said. "I reckon I can do it one more time." The next 10 days were the longest Eleanor had spent since her mother's illness. She worked. She managed the fields and the accounts and the tenant farm school, and she documented everything with a precision that went past her usual thoroughness into something closer to obsession. She wrote down every visitor, every conversation, every observation about Dawes on the road. She cross-referenced her operational notes against the timeline of everything that had happened. She built a document that was part record and part argument and all evidence. She did not let herself count down to his arrival. She counted forward instead. What needed to be done today? What needed to be done tomorrow? What needed to be in place before the legal proceedings accelerated? She was reviewing the yield estimates for the final summer harvest on the 9th day. James, standing across the table from her while she asked questions when she heard hooves on the long drive. She kept her eyes on the page. She finished her question to James. She heard Joseph's voice in the yard greeting someone. She heard a voice answer. She looked up. James was watching her face. "Ma'am," he said quietly, "I believe I can finish this calculation on my own." She set her pen down. She walked to the front door and opened it. Gideon Blackwood was dismounting in the yard. He had been riding hard. The horse was tired and he was dusty, and he looked when he turned and saw her in the doorway, like a man who had been holding a very specific intention in place for a very long distance and had now arrived at it. He walked toward the porch. She stepped down to the yard. They stopped 3 feet apart. She looked at him. He looked at her. "You're a day early," she said. "I rode faster," he said. She breathed. "Did you bring it?" she said. "The filing, the Attorney General's involvement." "Everything is in motion," he said. "The formal complaint was filed in Philadelphia 6 days ago. The Richmond firm received notification this morning. Cross was suspended from Meridian by the board pending investigation." He paused. "Dawes was arrested in Richmond 2 days ago on a separate charge fraud connected to one of the other 14 properties. He will be questioned about yours." Eleanor stood very still. "It's done," she said. "The beginning of it is done," he said. "There will be proceedings, testimony. It will take time. But the structure of it is in place, and it will not be easily dismantled." She nodded. She pressed her hands together, a gesture she made when she was keeping something contained. "The note," she said. "The transfer to the Richmond firm has been challenged and is pending court review," he said. "In the interim, Meridian has agreed formally in writing to honor the original restructuring terms I outlined." She looked at him. "The water rights," she said. "Return to the property as a condition of the restructuring agreement," he said. "Signed by 2 Meridian board members, witnessed by my solicitor." She could not speak for a moment. She thought about the eastern parcel and the creek and the gray clay bottom she had seen 6 weeks ago when the drought was at its worst. She thought about the northern fields and the careful irrigation she had managed, not knowing whether the water rights beneath it were still hers. She thought about her grandfather writing a survival clause into a deed in 1801, because he understood that a woman needed something she could not have taken from her. She thought about all of it. "Miss Hartwell," Blackwood said. "Eleanor," she said. He was quiet for a moment. "Eleanor," he said. The way he said it was not formal. It was something else, something that had been building through letters and lamplit hallways and fence posts in the rain, and 3 words delivered at the bottom of a staircase. She looked at him directly. "You came back," she said. "I told you I would," he said. "You did," she said. "I believed you." "I know," he said. "You told me." She looked at him for a long moment. She looked at the dust on his coat and the tiredness in his face, and the thing behind his eyes that was not tiredness, that was something that had been there since the first night when she told him he was rude, and he had stood in the parlor doorway and not denied it. She said, "I have something to show you." He waited. She reached into her apron pocket and brought out a folded document. She held it out. He took it. He unfolded it and read it. She watched his eyes move across the page and watched the moment he understood what he was reading. He looked up. "The Baltimore account," he said. "My mother's," she said. $430. I used some of it to pay the labor arrears. The remainder is in a separate account in my name in the county bank." She held his gaze. "I wrote to my mother's Baltimore family. Her cousin there is a lawyer. He has been reviewing the full extent of what was taken from her estate." She paused. "He believes the recoverable amount through legal proceedings is somewhere between $3,000 and $5,000. Blackwood was very still. "Eleanor," he said, "my mother built something real," she said, "and it was taken from her after she died by men who believed there was no one left to protect it." Her voice was steady, and she intended it to be. They were wrong. She left someone. She just didn't know it yet. She took the document back. "I am going to recover every cent. It will take time, and it will take legal work, and it will be hard. But I am going to do it." He looked at her. "I know you are," he said, and the way he said it had nothing of doubt in it. She put the document back in her pocket. "There is something else," he said. She looked at him. He reached into his coat and brought out a folded paper of his own. He held it for a moment before he offered it. She took it. She unfolded it. It was a legal document, Formal letterhead. Dense language. She read it slowly the way she read everything, and about halfway down the page she stopped. She read the paragraph again. She looked up. "This is a partnership proposal," she said. "Yes," he said. "From Meridian Bank." "From me," he said. "Through Meridian. As a formal instrument." He held her gaze. "A co-management arrangement for Hartwell Plantation, with you as primary operational authority, and my name as guarantor on the restructured note. Joint decision-making on all capital investments above a set threshold." He paused. "And a provision for gradual equity transfer to full ownership in your name over a 10-year term." She looked at the document. She thought about what it meant. What it was. A man who had come to take her property offering instead to stand behind it. A man with a title and a bank and a complicated institution at his back asking her to run the thing that mattered because she was the one who knew how. She thought about what her mother had said about circumstances not being reliable. She thought about what her mother had built anyway. "This is not a charitable arrangement," she said. It was not a question, but there was a question in it. "No," he said. "It is a sound financial investment. This property under your management will be profitable within 3 years. The bank knows it. I know it." He paused. "That is not why I drew up the document." She looked at him. "Why did you draw it up?" she said. He was quiet for a moment, in the way he was quiet when he was choosing to be honest rather than careful. "Because I have been in a great many houses," he said, "and sat across a great many tables, and I have never in my life met a person who built what you have built, the way you built it, from what you had to build it from." He held her gaze. "And I did not want to leave Virginia again without making clear that I intend to be part of what you are building, not as a banker, not as a creditor." He paused. "As a partner." The yard was quiet. The summer afternoon held its breath. Eleanor looked at this man. She looked at him the way she had learned to look at the land, seeing what was really there, not what she wanted to be there, not what fear told her was there. She looked at his record, what he had done, the rope and the fence post, the letter to the solicitor, the ride to the attorney general, the 41 days of letters that always ended with something plain and real beneath the legal language. How are the northern fields? She took a breath. "I have conditions," she said. Something moved at the corner of his mouth. Almost a smile. The closest she had seen. "Of course you do," he said. "My father stays on the property," she said. "Non-negotiable. He has no financial authority, but he has a home here as long as he wants it." "Agreed," he said. "The tenant families," she said. "Their housing and wages are protected in the partnership terms. Not as a courtesy, as a binding condition." "I'll have the solicitor add the language," he said. "Thomas Deary," she said. "I want him formally listed as a witness to the partnership agreement. He witnessed the original deed that saved this property. He should witness the document that preserves it." "Done," he said. She looked at the document in her hands. She thought about her mother's ledger found in the attic. $430 held quiet and safe in a variation of a name. A woman who understood that you protected what mattered by being smarter than the people trying to take it. She thought about what her mother would have done with this moment. She thought her mother would have taken the pen. "I'll need a lawyer to review the terms," she said. "The Baltimore cousin," he said immediately. She looked at him. He looked back at her, and for the first time since the night of the dinner party when she had stood in the parlor door and said, "I hope it was worth the trip." "Your Grace," the quality of his expression was entirely unguarded. It was warm. "You read my letter," she said. Every word he said, she breathed. "Gideon," she said. First time. She watched him register it. "Yes," he said. "Stay for supper," she said. He held her gaze. "Yes," he said again. She turned and walked back toward the house. At the porch step, she paused and looked back over her shoulder. "And after supper," she said, "I want to walk the northern fields. The harvest yield projection is better than I expected, and I want a second opinion on the final numbers." He looked at her. "A financial second opinion," she said, from someone who understands the difference between what a ledger says and what the land is actually worth. He came up the porch steps. He stopped beside her. He was close enough that she could see the dust still on his coat and the tiredness that was not quite tiredness in his eyes. "The northern fields," he said quietly. "And then what?" She looked at him. "Then," she said, "we make a plan." She opened the front door and walked into the house. He followed. Behind them, the summer evening settled over Hartwell Plantation, over the northern fields, and the repaired tenant houses, and the creek with its water rights returned, and the eastern parcel, with its survival clause intact, and the long fence line that Eleanor Hartwell had walked every morning for 6 years. She had not been saved by a man with a title and a bank. She had built something worth staying for, and someone had stayed. And on the evening that Gideon Blackwood walked into her house for the second time, not to take it, but to stand beside the woman who had always been its true foundation, Eleanor Hartwell finally allowed herself to believe that what she had built was not just enough to survive. It was enough to last.